In this example, we're going to take a look at the SQL API available on CivicData and see just how easy it is to query data out and interact with it. So let's get started. What you have up on the screen here is a data set that I uploaded. Happens to be an open data set from Atlanta for permit activity for March 2014. In CivicData here, you'll see that the data in the preview view will look just like a spreadsheet. We'll see all the columns and rows that are available. We'll see that this data set has 522 records. And what we'll want to take a look at here is this Data API button. This Data API button is a really useful tool when interacting with CivicData. It gives me simple examples to see how I can query the data. For this one, we're going to take a look at how I can query the data using SQL. So I'm just going to take the sample script that they have here and open up a new browser tab and start writing my SQL statement right here. First up, we see that here's the API endpoint that we're calling. And then the second half here, we see the actual SQL statement. So I'll just go ahead and start writing my statement here. So for this example, what I'm going to do is basically get a count of all the permits by type. So if we take a look at my data over here again, we'll notice that the permit type is in a field called type. So I'm going to say select type. Notice that I am pulling my column name in double quotes. Count all, and I'm going to alias that as a field name count. From, and then you'll notice that there's this big long string of letters and numbers. We call that a resource ID, but for those of you that are familiar with SQL, you can think of that basically as your table name. At the end of my statement here, I'm going to get rid of the where clause because I don't want to filter the data. I just want to get an aggregate count. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my group by type, and then I'm going to order by count. And then all I got to do to give this a try is go ahead and hit enter. And what's really nice is I can try this straight from a browser. As I hit enter here, what I got is my JSON response right here. So we'll see that call was successful. And then we'll see my result records right here. So here we see in descending order a count of permits by type. So now let's apply this data. What I'm going to do is open up an HTML file that I have here. I have it all set up where it's just very simple. I just got a header telling it's a query demo, an example of querying CivicData from a simple HTML page using jQuery. Okay, so the way this is going to work is I have a little button that I put on the screen right here, and when we press this button, I want it to query CivicData and then display the data in a pie chart. So let's scroll down here a little bit. We're going to skip past this function. We'll come back to that and take a look here. So here we're using a little bit of jQuery and saying, hey, on click of that button that I talked about earlier, what we want to do is go ahead and query CivicData. So I'm going to go grab my query from the browser that we know works because we saw the results here. I'm going to go ahead and put my query right here. That's going to go ahead and handle basically making my JSON request using this little helper function down here. What we're saying here is if it's successful, if it's not successful, then we'll show an error. Otherwise, what we're going to want to do is take a look at the data that's returned. And what I'm doing is I'm just parsing it into an array so we can use it to draw our chart. And I'm creating an associative array where the key value is the type of permit and the value is the number of permits. When that's all done, we're going to loop back and call the draw chart function. And we see that up here. We're passing in that data set that we just parsed into an array. We are adding a column permit type and count. We are adding rows using this for loop, looping through the array that we passed in. Again, putting the key in for the data type and the value in for the count. Here's some simple options we can take a look at for our chart. Here's a title. We want it to be a 3D chart, width and height. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and draw that chart with the data that we set up and with the options we called. and then that chart will be rendered in this div right here. So let's save, and then let's open up this index file. All right, so here we have a blank HTML page, and when I hit the press to query CivicData, up pops a chart with my data from my query to CivicData. So we'll pop back over, take a look at my JSON response. We'll see that commercial alteration had 105. Here we are in blue, commercial alteration with 105, and it's rendering it pretty simply. I'm just using Google Charts to build this chart right here. It's a really nice and flexible set of utilities that you can use. And that's about it. No server-side processing on the JSON. Just a simple index.html page allowed me to query CivicData and display it in a chart format.